To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. And we'll recite this verse that I taught on a little bit last week. Again, especially this third line that we went into about the importance of subduing our own minds, doing everything we can to curtail all the negative states of thoughts, and then to increase those positive qualities, those that bring about our own happiness as well as the happiness of others. So let's recite that verse as well as the verse from the Vajracutter Sutra that follows, bringing to mind the teachings of the Buddha. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. We have a short dedication verse. Through these merits, may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we'll do the short mandala offering, making this vast pure offering to again make that connection with our gurus, the Buddhas, all these holy beings, once more to receive their blessings or inspiration so we can actualize all these teachings in our own hearts and minds. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami. Then refuge in Bodhichitta 3 times, first time in English, the other 2 in Tibetan, bringing to our minds these thoughts of safe direction in the 3 jewels, as well as the motivation of Bodhichitta that we'll also meditate on shortly. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shok, sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sonam gi, dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, thank you, Mary. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation then, give ourselves a chance to let go of whatever distractions we might have in our minds, focus the mind a bit using the breath for the first few minutes. And again, if you have a technique you already use with the breath, feel free to do that. If you need a suggestion, work with the area around the nostrils where you feel the sensation of the air coming in and out. In whatever way you're working with the breath, try to keep your awareness with the breath. Whenever you see that the mind's wandered, gently guide the mind back to the breath, letting go of whatever distractions you may have had. And I'll come in a few minutes and lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation of bodhicitta more strongly. Okay. So now let's set our motivation for today. And in last week's class, we spoke about the importance of motivation and even went through the example that shows how if we have a really strong, compassionate motivation, we can even transform non-virtue into virtue through the force of a positive thought, especially this most far-reaching attitude of bodhicitta. We can transform all of our actions, whether they are naturally virtuous, non-virtuous, or even neutral, into the causes for enlightenment for ourselves and others. So we see that it's very important that we spend time cultivating this motivation of bodhicitta. This is why we do this before all of our classes, all of our spiritual practice. So let's go through the stages of the path to enlightenment that reinforce how we need to expand our motivation. And recall from earlier teachings in this course how the very first level of motivation is to let go of our attachment to this life. As Lama Atisha says, to give up on this life, to recognize that we aren't here in this gathering today to create the causes of happiness in this existence. The happiness of this life is fleeting, temporary, and generally it just creates patterns of attachment. We have to at least have the motivation of gaining a good rebirth, using the time we have together here to create the causes for us to have a continuity of good rebirths, states of existence where we will be able to continue to meet with the precious Dharma, to have the opportunity to work on our own minds, to develop our qualities, reduce our negative tendencies. It's so important that we continue to have an existence just like this one or even better than this one. So that's the first level of motivation, to recognize that we're here at least for the happiness of future lives, the good conditions of future lives. But then we see that even if we do gain a good rebirth, we will still be within the wheel of existence, continuing to go from life to life under the control of our karma and delusions, not having removed the deeper causes of our suffering, our dissatisfaction. We've already spent some time examining how to address these states of mind, how to correct them through antidotes, through ways that we can lessen them and eventually eliminate them. If we can do that, we can attain liberation. We can accomplish this peaceful state of nirvana. We can be free of our suffering once and for all. This is the second level of motivation, what Rinpoche calls the middle capable being, where we recognize that it would be much better to at least focus on this result, which is more lasting. We can do the work of accomplishing liberation and be done with it once and for all. Whereas if we continue to just get good rebirths, we have to always in every life do that work, and we'll never be free from suffering. So now, cultivate that motivation that is shared with those beings who do want to achieve self-liberation, thinking that you're here today engaging in these teachings with a true spirit of renunciation, turning away from all of samsara towards nirvana, towards liberation. And then we get to the great capable being, the person who sees that we're not alone in our predicament, that when we examine the world around us, all we see are beings who are just like us, simply wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, but continuing to be caught up in all the patterns that lead to just ongoing suffering, dissatisfaction. Moreover, we are connected to those beings. We are dependent upon those beings. We have received kindness from those beings. Wouldn't it be ideal to repay their kindness by going beyond our own liberation, to desire to achieve the state of enlightenment, Buddhahood, a state where we then can work perfectly for each and every being without exception, we can become the cause that helps them to find their deepest potential, to accomplish their own enlightenment. Again, this is the ideal motivation, the motivation that will transform all of our actions into the cause of the resultant happiness for all beings. We will be able to achieve our own fulfillment of our purpose, but moreover, achieve the fulfillment of others' purpose, be able to be dedicated to helping each and every one of those beings. So expand your heart to include this level of motivation for today, to make all of our actions today, whatever thoughts we have, whatever words we say, just being here together will be infused with this desire to be a benefit to all sentient beings and the wish to become enlightened to accomplish that. Okay, so I touched on a number of the themes that we've already talked about in this course. This is the last class of this series on Rinpoche's book, A Door to Satisfaction. So let me go ahead and get us back into the material a little bit. These are things that we covered in the last 5 sessions, knowing how to practice Dharma, kind of recognizing this opportunity that we have in this human rebirth, and that practicing the Lam Rim is what it boils down to. And essentially everything else we've talked about fits into the Lam Rim in some way. The very beginning of setting our foot on the path to enlightenment is the second bullet point there, to give up on this life, to not be so attached to this existence that we currently have, because we see that if we put all of our energy into that, we will have wasted this life. Moreover, if we create the pattern that's in the third bullet point of being attached to these 8 worldly dharmas, wanting material gain, wanting to avoid any material loss, and so on, all of these worldly dharmas that we've talked about extensively, these become problematic for us because they only create patterns of attachment and desire. And we have to learn how to cut off desire, as we looked at in the 4th session, to recognize that it's not leading us to any deeper satisfaction. It's only going to create further problems for us, and it will block our progress on the path to enlightenment. Again, this is why Rinpoche, as I've mentioned a number of times, saw that this book that he found, this text that he found, Opening the Door of Dharma, was revolutionary for him. He saw that a lot of what he thought he had been practicing as Dharma wasn't actually Dharma, because true Dharma means to turn away from the happiness of this life, to not become attached to all of the pleasures of this life. And we need to cut off that desire, at least to begin our path, to not be so preoccupied with the affairs of this life that generally lead us to just more ruin, more suffering. Then we went on in the last class to talk about motivation and subduing the mind, which I went into in the meditation, so perhaps I don't need to talk about that so much. But once more, mind is really central in Buddhism. We really have to learn how to work with our minds day in and day out. Without that skill, we're going to be subject to the yo-yo mentality of going up when things are good, going back down when things are bad, not having any measure of control over our minds so that we can actually progress on the path with whatever we're meeting. Remember that this text is within the genre of mind training, and that's what mind training essentially is being able to work with our minds in the midst of whatever we have, problems, happiness, whatever states we're going through. We want to have that skill. So today, I'm going to touch briefly on remembering death and impermanence. I actually decided to make that my topic for my Tuesday morning meditations, which I've started that topic this past Tuesday with the first 3 points of the first root, which is that death is certain, and then going on to the other 2 this Tuesday and then next Tuesday. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that because Rinpoche did do a whole chapter on that, and I think it is important that we remind ourselves of the importance of that meditation, having some awareness of death. Then we're going to go on to some of the great capable being topics that we've been kind of alluding to and moving in the direction of cherishing others, finding no self to cherish, the emptiness teachings, and then the conclusion to the text, which is having no choice but to practice Dharma, which is a really beautiful little chapter that is Rinpoche's way of putting the flame underneath us to get us to move in that direction. But it's really quite sweet in terms of you can see his genuine compassion for us in the words that he shares there. So So Rinpoche says in the chapter on impermanence and death, death can happen at any moment, even to you. We have this tendency to think, well, we hear it happening around, to other people and what have you, but somehow we think we're immune in some weird way. We all know deep down that we are going to die, but we can have that denial. Rinpoche says death can happen at any moment to the friend, enemy, or stranger, all the people around us. Your possessions also deteriorate, and not only do they change within each second, but they can also be separated from you at any time. So what he's alluding to when he talks about within each second is, of course, the subtle form of impermanence that is the basis for the grosser levels of impermanence. Everything that is conditioned is changing momentarily. It doesn't stay the same for a single moment. All the physical things in our world, as well as even our consciousness, constantly changing each moment. And so this is the nature of things. And of course, we have a tendency to cling to the opposite, to think that things are going to be able to get them into a position where they won't change. They'll be sort of eternal and unchanging. And of course, that's not what we're ideally, trying to accomplish. While yes, the state of Buddhahood is one that goes on for an eternity, we don't ever degenerate from that. Nonetheless, it's within the context of subtle impermanence. Everything's still changing, even a Buddha's mind, constantly changing moment by moment. So this is the nature of things. We have to learn to accept this. And then, of course, the implication for gross impermanence, the fact that this life goes out of existence, this body will cease to support our consciousness, and death will come. Without a doubt, we will have to deal with that reality. And that's the real impetus to our practice. So Rinpoche goes on to say, therefore, there is no reason at all to allow discriminating thoughts of attachment, anger, or ignorance to arise in relation to these objects. Be aware that these things are transitory in nature and not permanent. So we can use the understanding of impermanence in terms of ourselves and our going out of existence, as well as everything around us, changing moment by moment, as a means to let go of our attachment, our anger, or even our ignorance. But having that understanding that things are fleeting and transitory, well, why do we cling to them so tightly? Why do we have a mind that is seeing them in an opposing way, that is holding on to them in that way? If we look at, the mind of attachment or anger at the moment when it's arising, it does seem to think that that thing that is the object of that is fixed, that it's not changing. Whereas when we have these experiences, we know that things are changing all the time. Even eating a delicious a delicious meal, delicious food, I was going to say, and meal, I said them together anyway, a delicious meal, that food is changing moment by moment. The initial experience of it is one thing, and then as we continue to eat, that whole experience is subject to change. But nonetheless, we can have great attachment arising in relationship to that food. The same with somebody who we get angry or upset at. We think that they're sort of fixed in their negative nature, and we have these thoughts of anger towards them on the basis of them not being able to change, thinking that that is how they are in a very static way. But everything is dynamic. Everything is changing around us all the time. If we really apply the understanding of impermanence to our mind and the way that our mind's working, we can see it's a very powerful tool to undermine a lot of the delusions that we have arising. So he goes on to say then, the main remedy to the thought of the worldly dharmas, they're back again, they're going to be back a couple of times today, is meditation on impermanence and death. If one does not remember death, one does not remember Dharma, the capital D Dharma that we need to practice, not the lowercase Dharma that are the worldly Dharmas that we get involved in. And even if one remembers death, Rinpoche says, if one does not remember impermanence and death, one does not practice Dharma. If you remember Dharma, well, remembering Dharma means that you do bring it to mind on occasion. But if we don't get that, the import of recognizing impermanence and death, that grosser form of impermanence, then we don't practice Dharma. We don't take advantage of the moments that we have. Again, all of us like to think that we have a very long time in this human life to practice Dharma, to do the things we'd like to do, to engage in retreat, to do more practice, what have you. And we keep putting it off with the idea that there's plenty of time, but there's absolutely no guarantee with regard to that. So remembering impermanence, and especially remembering the uncertainty of when death comes, is the greatest impetus to our practice and to overcoming the worldly dharmas. If you remember impermanence and death, Rinpoche says, you lead a highly meaningful life. You're able to practice the paths of the 3 levels of capability that we went through in our meditation today and achieve the 3 great purposes. the happiness of future lives, because we dedicate ourselves to practicing virtue and creating the causes for that. Liberation, which is self-liberation, which can be attained through the foundation of good morality that we've developed, as well as concentration and wisdom. And then enlightenment, when we unite those thoughts with compassion for all beings, with bodhicitta, and we attain the state of enlightenment for the sake of others. We can accomplish all three of these if we remember impermanence and death. But if we don't, how we're going to accomplish our worldly dharmas? We're going to get to the end of this life and we have nothing to show for it in terms of our spiritual practice. So very briefly, the death awareness meditation has the three roots. The one that, again, I led a meditation on this past Tuesday, death is certain. I won't go into the individual reasons, but just allude to them. Essentially, this is something that, although we know intellectually, do we live our lives from that vantage point, thinking that it is absolutely certain that death will come? Therefore, the conclusion, based on the meditations we do in that topic, is we have to practice Dharma. We have to engage in Dharma while we have this life, because there is an endpoint to this life. It's not going to go on forever. The second one, again, is the one Lama Tsongkhapa says is most important, because this is the one that gets us to recognize that we have to practice Dharma now. And that's because the time of death is uncertain. Certainly having the pandemic going on has reinforced this idea for so many people, right? Because there are many people who were very, very healthy, who had no other real underlying conditions, who succumbed to this virus, and that was the end of their life. They thought they had many, many more years, many things that they could do with this life, and it's over for them. That life is gone at this point. And the same thing could happen to us, and not just due to COVID-19. I mean, it could happen on the basis of a million other things. There are so many different things that can cause death. It's actually amazing every day, and we're encouraged to do this every day, to wake up and rejoice that we didn't die that night, that we have another day in this human life. But to remember then that there's no guarantee with regard to that day not being our last day. And we know that this is so. We hear these stories of people who die very unexpectedly. There are certainly those who live into their old age, who have a more natural death, as it's called. But nonetheless, this is not the guarantee by any means. So we have to live our lives with that awareness. The last of these points is that at the time of death, the only thing that really helps you is Dharma. And this is where you examine all those things that you have in your life that you depend upon so greatly right now for some measure of peace, happiness, what have you. Well, all those things you're going to have to separate from without a doubt. You cannot take anything with you other than your consciousness goes on to the next existence, and what you've done with your mind goes on to the next existence. So Dharma, which is working with our minds, increasing our positive qualities, diminishing our negative tendencies, that is what goes on to the next life. That's what will help at the time of death. That's what will help you to die peacefully, as well as to go from this life to your next life with some assurance that there's going to be a continuity of access to the Dharma, practicing, continuing to develop your mind all the way to enlightenment. So again, I will lead meditations on the last two of these 3 points next 2 Tuesdays. You're welcome to join for those. So Rinpoche then says, the best thing to do is to recite every morning, I am going to die today. That may feel like a little strange for some of you to recite that. When I've taught on it before, people give me a weird look like, what are you asking me to do? It's not an affirmation. You're not saying an affirmation like those popular affirmations, that people were doing some decades ago, saying, oh, I'm going to die today. I'm going to die today. And then it comes true. The idea is that you want to prepare yourself for that reality. Even if you think, I may die today, that's already very powerful. And if that feels more comfortable to you, say it. But Rinpoche really encourages us to think, I am going to die today. This is my last day in this body, on this planet, in this form. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to use this day well then. So as Rinpoche says, this thought cuts off all problems. Once you make this decision, there are no more problems. Problems come from your wrong ideas, your wrong conceptions. Thinking that you are going to die today cuts off these wrong conceptions and problems. So many of our thoughts are all oriented again around the worldly dharmas and acquiring those things and trying to avoid the painful things and what have you. If we knew that today was our last day, if we had that conviction that today was our last day, we wouldn't be preoccupied with all those things, right? You'd say, oh, well, I need to prepare then. If death is coming for me today, I need to have my mind ready for that event. I need to know that I've got, I kind of jokingly call it future life insurance, assuring that you're going to have a good rebirth, and a good rebirth where you have the conditions complete for being able to practice the Dharma, to meet with the Mahayana teachings and so on. So this is an important aspect of our practice, is to remember that death can come at any day, or on any day, at any time. So again, the whole idea is to familiarize ourselves with that thought. If the thought of I am going to die today works for you, by all means use that. If you can at least use I may die today, well, that already is getting us a little bit closer to that thought of the uncertainty of the time of death. And therefore, we will hopefully use this day much more meaningfully. And again, let go of all these other things. You have no more problems and you have no more preoccupations with all these other things. Then Rinpoche goes on to say, and this is what's going to lead us right into the next topic. After you have made this decision, it is very good to remember this verse from Lama Zopa, the Guru Puja. Cherishing myself is the source of all sufferings, while cherishing others is the basis of all qualities. Please grant me blessings to do the heart practice, the yoga of exchanging myself for others. So again, Rinpoche shares this verse because it is really so essential to the Mahayana motivation of Bodhichitta, to recognize that cherishing ourselves, to be preoccupied with our own happiness, our own welfare, only is going to bring about more suffering. We saw it with the 8 worldly dharmas in terms of that level of preoccupation we have with me and what I need and what I want and so on. But even if we, manage to break away a bit from those 8 worldly dharmas, we still have these deeply ingrained patterns of self-cherishing. And Rinpoche is going to give us some teachings from the book. I'll share a few of the passages that help us to get our mind around that thought of exchanging self and others. And the second line, cherishing others, is the basis of all qualities. Well, if we think about it karmically, every time that we cherish another being, we're creating positive karma. We're generating compassion, love, concern for their well-being, and we're generally engaging in actions that follow from that. If you see a homeless person on the street and you're moved by their condition of suffering and what they're going through, and you make the decision to be generous to them, to give them some of your resources, well, you get good karma from that. I mean, it's not that you're doing the action. You shouldn't ideally be doing the action for your own future benefit. But the reality is any karma we engage in that is positive is going to be generated by concern for others. Why we don't lie to beings, why we tell them the truth, why we don't steal from others, why we rather protect their resources. All of these come from cherishing other beings. So if we really want to engage in our own welfare, this is the way that we actually do it wisely. That's why His Holiness calls us being wisely selfish. This is the way that we actually accomplish the benefit for both ourselves and others. Being attentive to their needs, we will, as a side effect of that, as a benefit of that, have our own welfare taken care of. So this is what we're going to be going to in terms of the teachings for today. The next topic of cherishing, learning to cherish others rather than cherishing oneself. But Rinpoche concludes as saying, "You are going to die today, so what are you going to do with your life?" And suddenly you have the answer. The heart practice is contained in the above verse. Whether or not you are able to recite many prayers, study extensively, or sit in meditation, or I might add, go into retreat or do all these amazing practices that many people are able to do. Regardless of that, as Rinpoche says, this is the essential, most meaningful practice. And of course, if we live our lives with that mind of cherishing others, then all of our actions become very powerful, as I mentioned last week, in terms of bodhicitta motivation. Bodhicitta, which is based on the idea of cherishing others. That is at the root of it. And that's why this technique that involves equalizing and exchanging self and others is about building up our bodhicitta, increasing our bodhicitta thought, so it eventually becomes spontaneous for us. But this is, as Rinpoche says the essential, most meaningful thing that we can do with our lives is, as was said in that verse, to do the heart practice, the yoga of exchanging myself for others. My general concern for myself that I've been preoccupied with since beginningless time, to replace it with a new concern, a concern for others and for their well-being. So, simply by thinking of the words of this verse, Rinpoche says that cherishing the self is the basis of all obstacles and sufferings, and cherishing others, the basis of all good qualities, you are able to change the object of your concern, to get rid of our preoccupation with me, myself, and I, to be dedicated to the welfare of others. It is interesting when we practice that thought, how liberating it is. And Rinpoche is going to talk a little bit about this. This is why we need to engage in this, is because it is the basis of well-being for everyone. I sometimes use like a little graph. So if you had, cherishing self, cherishing others, and then you looked at the basis for what will be the results for oneself and for others. Well, if we cherish oneself, we think that we're going to get happiness, but we actually don't get an X in that box. Cherishing yourself doesn't lead to self-happiness, doesn't lead to greater happiness for oneself. In the moment, you might think it does because you get more of those things that the craving mind is all about. But it doesn't lead to any real lasting peace or happiness. And we create karma, as we've talked about in the past, that only brings about future suffering. So the results that we have in the end is not happiness at all. It's suffering. Moreover, if we cherish oneself, what's it like for the column of others? Well, they don't get an X there either because it doesn't meet their needs. How are others' happiness, how is their happiness benefited from our cherishing ourselves? It's outside of the scope of it. We're only worried about ourselves. Sometimes we even step on other people's feet and do things to harm them to get the happiness that we seek. The self-cherishing mind is heinous. It does horrible things in the world. I mean, watch an episode of Dateline or one of these things where you see people that, get so attached to somebody that they can't see their life without them, and they end up killing them on the basis of that, self-cherishing, wanting that person for themselves, not wanting them to be with their partner on the side or whatever the case might be. I mean, this is what the mind of self-cherishing does in the world. It creates a lot of pain and agony for other people as well. But it certainly at least neglects their welfare. All the time we spend trying to satisfy the mind of self-cherishing doesn't lead to benefiting others in the least, and it only leads to our own suffering. So let's go to the next box, which is again where we look at cherishing others. And let's look at it first in regard to others. Self. Well, it does lead to our own future benefit, as I just explained earlier. If we engage in positive actions that are motivated by cherishing others, we're generous and kind to those people who need resources, time, protection, Dharma teachings, whatever. If we also engage in good morality of avoiding harming others, killing them, stealing from them, and so on, well, then we get good karma from that. And we end up having happiness in the future on the basis of our own actions and thoughts. Let's look at the column for others. Well, they're benefiting too then, right? They're not going to have Don involved in their suffering anymore because Don won't be killing them and stealing from them and saying harmful things to them and so on. And Don will be concerned about their welfare and giving them resources and doing all the things for them. So that we get a win-win situation when it comes to cherishing others, whereas it's a lose-lose situation when we cherish ourselves. And of course, the world has been operating under the control of self-cherishing since beginningless time. No wonder there's so much war and strife and animosity and division and everything going on in our world. It's because everyone is motivated by a high degree of self-cherishing. Again, it's not to say that we don't have some measure of cherishing others. Every one of us has some cause or some beings in our lives that cause us to reach out and be concerned about them, to develop some positive actions towards them. But the vast majority of our lives are guided by self-cherishing. Most of these actions we engage in are simply directed at the happiness of me, myself, and I, and to hell with everyone else. When we hear it at a national level, like when our previous president was saying America first, a lot of people in this country didn't like this idea of America first, but there were a lot who did, who really want to think that our job is to take care of ourselves first and to hell with everyone else. I mean, I'm maybe not that literal, but nonetheless, they have definitely this concern that is me, myself, and I most important, and everyone else less important. That's what the mind of self-cherishing is all about. So let's get into these teachings, because again, I want to be sure to share everything that I've assembled from Rinpoche's book in regard to these topics. Oh, I've got one more little bit that I forgot. I had another little piece from the Death and Impermanence. Before, your concern was only for yourself, but just by saying these words that were in that verse, you change the object of your concern from the self to the other sentient beings suffering in the six realms. And again, by virtue of that, you get a win-win situation. So constantly keep the thought of other sentient beings in place of the I. Change from cherishing the I to cherishing others. Always hold this thought in your heart and do all your actions on the basis of this attitude. Again, that's the instructions that we're going to be going into, but essentially this is already in this section saying that this is how we make our life meaningful until death comes. And if death comes today and we've lived our day cherishing others with all of our actions, infusing all of our even normal activities with bodhicitta motivation, with a wish to be a benefit, well, then we will have used our life meaningfully. So let's go on to the topic of cherishing others more specifically. That is the subject of one of the chapters. I can't remember which chapter it is, 8 or something like that. So Rinpoche starts off this chapter by saying, the thought of bodhicitta is unbelievable. It makes everything other than working for sentient beings boring and unsatisfying. There is no real interest or enjoyment in life apart from this. Anything else is meaningless, empty, essenceless. It really is a most amazing mind. Again, I don't claim to be an expert on all spiritual traditions. I only have a little bit of knowledge of Buddhism, but then when it comes to other traditions, I don't have that much knowledge at all. But I've never encountered anything like this mind. In the Christian tradition, which is where I grew up in Catholicism, there is this idea of Christ embodying these sorts of qualities, of being dedicated to the welfare of all beings, of even giving up his life for the sake of all of humanity, all beings. Not all beings necessarily, maybe, but all humanity for sure. But there's this idea that I at least encountered in Christianity, which was that we don't have the potential to be Christ. We might be Christ-like, we might behave as Christ did, as an example that he set for us. But of course, in Buddhism, the Buddha isn't something that is unattainable. The Buddha is simply a being who was just like us, who developed their minds to the same degree that we have the potential to do. So this is very reassuring to me when I entered into my Buddhist studies and found Tibetan Buddhism back in 1993. Was that it was revealing to me that there was this set of teachings that showed that every one of us has the ability to become something divine, sacred, to have that potential to be of immense benefit to all beings. And I think this is, again, unique to Buddhism to some degree. I don't know all these other traditions to know whether there's something that is comparable, but it's a pretty amazing mind to be dedicated to accomplishing one's deepest potential so that you can then be a benefit to all beings, so that then you can free them all from suffering. I mean, it's a pretty amazing thought, and one that should give us incredible courage, incredible joy, that we should be able to live our lives with these teachings. So we need to have techniques to develop this. As I mentioned earlier, the teachings that Rinpoche is going through in the book mostly pertain to the technique that's called equalizing and exchanging self and others, where we recognize that the biggest obstacle to our being of benefit to others to that degree, to generating bodhicitta, is our self-cherishing, our tendency of being self-centered, thinking we're most important and neglecting the needs of others. We have to address that and firmly uproot that, and then we can supplant it with the mind that cherishes others, that holds them to be most supreme, and therefore is compassionate towards them, is loving towards them, and wants to be a Buddha for the sake of them. But this is one of the most powerful techniques for generating bodhicitta, and it's firmly rooted in the mind training teachings, the Lojong teachings. The other technique, which we won't be going into as part of this course, and I'm not even going to go into this other technique that much, but this technique of the sevenfold cause and effect is where we see sentient beings as having been someone very dear to us, recognizing that every being has been your mother, your father, a kind person in your life. They may not be that in this life, but they were definitely it in one of your lives because you've had beginningless lives. And then going on to feel a real appreciation for the kindness kindness they must have shown us in that existence, as well as the kindness we experience from all beings in every life, and then wanting to repay that kindness and essentially generating love and compassion on that basis, and wanting to again become a Buddha to be able to help others who have been your kind mother, your father, what have you. So again, this technique of equalizing and exchanging self and others is part of the Lojong teachings. The Lojong teachings are to help us to do away with what are often called the twin demons. One of these demons, and again, these aren't external demons, these are the demons in our own minds, is self-cherishing. That demon of self-centeredness has been driving the show to a large degree, and even can be there in very subtle forms. When we talk about that motivation of the person of middling capacity, it's self-liberation. Even that is a form of subtle self-cherishing, where we think about, I need to get the heck out of samsara. I need to attain the state of nirvana. Bye, everyone. Hope it all works out for you. That would be a very self-centered mentality in some way, though it's not really afflicted, because this being who attains that self-liberation is free of all the afflictions, but they still have a very subtle imprint of cherishing themselves, holding themselves to be more important. So therefore, I'm going to get out of here, extricate myself from samsara, but I'm not going to be as concerned about whether all of you are removed from samsara. For the Bodhisattva, of course, this is one of the main obstacles to generating bodhicitta, as I said earlier, and therefore it becomes a particularly important demon that we need to address, is to get rid of that mind of self-cherishing, to want to uproot it completely. So again, we can supplant it with a genuine dedication of concern for all sentient beings and to hold them most dear. The other of the twin demons we're going to talk about in the next piece when we go into finding no I, no self to cherish, and that's self-grasping. That's the subtler form of ignorance that's operative in most of our actions and most of our states of mind. It even arises together with self-cherishing frequently. So these become like twin demons. They keep guiding the show for us. We keep doing things from that perspective of me being most important, and also me being real, me being something that is independently existing. And on the basis of this, we create all of our problems. So this is what we're going into in this section, is to try to address some of this tendency to be focused on ourselves by learning how to cherish others, how to hold them most dear. And Rinpoche has some very precious advice in this section. So he starts off with, again, reminding us that the whole goal of all of this, of looking at supplanting self with others in this meditation, is to develop bodhicitta, which is, unbelievably powerful state of mind. Real happiness and satisfaction start when you begin to live your life for others. You retreat for others, practice Dharma for others, study for others, work in the office for others, cook for others, bathe for others, exercise for others. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. You can do all of your actions for others because, again, you can do every one of those actions with bodhicitta, as I mentioned last week. When your attitude is transformed so that you do everything for others to pacify their suffering and obtain their happiness, there is real satisfaction and peace in your heart. Remember, the title of this whole book is The Door to Satisfaction. There's a little bit of satisfaction we've seen in each of the different teachings we've looked at. The satisfaction of letting go of our worldly concerns in this life, giving up on this life, and so on. But here we're talking about the greatest satisfaction we can have is to live our life for others. To be able to be dedicated day in and day out to accomplishing the welfare of all beings through this mind of bodhicitta that is focused on cherishing others as one currently cherishes oneself. In order to achieve ultimate happiness, Rinpoche says, we must destroy our delusions. The Dharma, the path, the Buddha, the Guru, for example, all these are meant to destroy your delusions, right? That's why we have such a strong reliance upon them, is because they're there to tame our minds, subdue our minds, as we talked about last week, to destroy our delusions, to hurt your self-cherishing thought, and to subdue your mind. This is why we have these things in our lives. These are why this is what the Buddha left behind in his legacy, is all of this that are the medicine for us to take to actually get rid of what are the sources of our problems and suffering and difficulty, and to help others to do the same, and to achieve states of unbelievable well-being by doing that. So then he jumps back again once more to a lot of these worldly dharmas. Receiving criticism, disrespect, or bad treatment also hurts your self-cherishing thought, your thought of the 8 worldly dharmas. This is not bad, though, but good. Therefore, hurting your self-cherishing thought and worldly concern is Dharma practice. So if we hurt these worldly concerns that we generally are driven by, and the self-cherishing thought that is accompanying them, that's Dharma practice. That's something we can take advantage of. So this is kind of taking another look at these 8 worldly dharmas that we saw earlier, where in that case, we were looking at how these are kind of not leading us to any real satisfaction. They're, problematic because we spend all of our time on them and so on. But here the idea is that we're going to look at how when we have obstacles to the 8 worldly dharmas, when we don't get the material gain that we want and we have to experience the material loss, when we don't get the comfort that we desire and we have to experience discomfort or displeasure, when we don't get the praise that we all are so attached to and we get criticism instead, or when we seek a good reputation, but nonetheless we have a bad reputation in whatever circle we're talking about. Those are exactly what will help you to cut the self-cherishing thought. That will help you to see that what is driving this whole thing is that tendency to be focused on me and thinking that my needs are most important. That's why people will lie to have a good reputation. That's why people will, do everything to pretend that they have done all these things so they receive praise. That's why people will do everything possible to achieve the things that bring them some measure of pleasure or happiness in this life, is because of the self-cherishing thought. That's why we step on others' toes. That's why we do all these things that are harmful to others. And of course, they're harmful to ourselves as well. So here the idea is that when you're experiencing obstacles to your 8 worldly dharmas, that's a lesson to direct them back on to the self-cherishing thought and see, this is the perfect opportunity for me to cut that self-cherishing thought once and for all, to recognize that that's what's driving me to do all these things. That's what's causing me to be so attached to acquiring more things, to having everything be comfortable. It's a self-cherishing thought behind why you don't want to sit in the middle seat on an airplane, which I always joke about as the perfect example of how self-cherishing operates at a very, or the 8 worldly concerns operate at a very kind of slight level, in terms of everyone wants to be comfortable. No one wants to sit in the middle seat. Nobody wants the discomfort of that. And so that's the seat that people don't gravitate towards. Nobody reserves it in advance unless you're traveling with someone that you want to sit next to. The idea is that we have these patterns. We have to look deeper into those. Where's that pattern coming from? It's self-cherishing. It's, I deserve that. I want that. To heck with everybody else. I mean, I don't care if they end up in a middle seat. I mean, they may even be somebody who finds it really uncomfortable to sit in the middle seat, basically, somebody who's a bit larger, perhaps, who their frame doesn't fit into the seat so comfortably. They'd be much more comfortable in a window seat or an aisle seat and so on. But we don't think about them when we want that, to avoid that middle seat. So once more, we can see self-cherishing playing a role in terms of these 8 worldly dharmas. So this is what Rinpoche is going into in this section initially, is to get us to see that all the things that he's been talking about, we can interpret them now at an even deeper level by understanding how self-cherishing is involved in them. Instead of seeing anything that harms your self-cherishing thought and worldly concern as negative, as our worldly mind does, we don't get that aisle seat or whatever. We end up in a middle seat and we think it's negative, and we had the worst flight in the world because we had to spend 2-3 hours, in that middle seat. Look at it as positive, Rinpoche says. Use it to destroy your delusions and to achieve liberation and enlightenment. That's how we transform the worldly dharmas into the capital D Dharma. When we see through the force of these patterns that we have, that we are attached to those things, that we are so caught up in those things, and we see what's driving it is our self-cherishing thought. And we go, this is it. I've found it now. This is the enemy. This is what I need to get rid of. This is what I need to abolish, what I need to eliminate. We use those worldly dharmas that we are confronted with and that we have to deal with the reality of not getting what we want. We use it to destroy our delusions, to move in the direction of liberation and enlightenment. So since people who bother you destroy your self-cherishing and other delusions, just as the Dharma, the Buddha, and the Guru do, they are actually not harming you, but helping you. This is kind of, again, the logic of how we can see those beings who are doing things that we might normally see as harmful to ourselves as actually being helpful. Remember, this is one of the core teachings within the Lojong tradition, the mind training or mind transformation teachings, is to use adverse conditions, to use difficulties in the path, to recognize that when we have those things happening, they are actually the perfect opportunity to practice. I mean, way back when the pandemic started, it does seem like it was quite a while ago. It's been just over a year, but nonetheless, sometimes seems a lot longer than that. I was mentioning to one group I was teaching to last summer that we might think we get a pass when all this is going on, right? When the world is so challenging and things are so difficult and we don't have all the things that we'd like and everything is so, frustrating every day, that somehow we get a pass. Then you don't have to work with your mind then, because it's all just so overwhelming that, sorry, I just can't operate at that level. So, but this is actually the perfect time to practice. This past year has been ideal for people to be able to look at things, to be confronted again, as I mentioned earlier, with the reality of impermanence and death all around us, the recognition of the mortality that we all possess, that we will not, there's no guarantee that we will live beyond today. The reminder of the fact that we do like things comfortable and having things that we want and being able to go to the store and have exactly what we desire, to be able to go to the restaurants, to go all these places, to do all these things. We should be able to see our mind of attachment very clearly. And of course, the mind of self-cherishing that is guiding that. And we should be able to do something to work on that. We don't get a pass. This is actually the ideal time to exist and to be working with what's going on in our world. And it's still going on. So there's still an opportunity. Maybe you didn't take advantage of it the last year, but you still can take advantage of it because it's still here. And of course, who knows what the future is going to hold. We like to think that there's some sort of place that goes back to normal, whatever we might call a new normal. But is that really what we want to go back to? Is that really we want to just become kind of back into patterns of attachment and the eight worldly concerns and the self-cherishing thought and the blah, 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 blah? Or do we actually want to use this as a transformative experience? That's what the essence of mind training is always pointed to be, is this idea of transforming suffering into happiness, making sure that everything we experience that is challenging is actually used as grist for the mill. Use as an opportunity to hold the mirror up to ourselves and say, what is guiding this? What is behind that thought? What is behind my frustration, my depression, my loneliness, my whatever, all these negative states of mind that we might have? We see that it's the self-cherishing mind and, of course, the deeper root of self-grasping, these twin demons that are guiding the show. So this is the opportunity that we have at these times, is to actually see that these problems, these difficulties, these people who are challenging to us, whatever they're doing, they are destroying our self-cherishing if we use them in that way, just like the Dharma, you know. So we have this great respect, this admiration for the Dharma, for the Buddha, for our gurus. Well, we should have the same respect for the people and the situations that we have in our lives that help us to cut through our own nonsense. They are not harming you, but they're actually helping you. So by showing you your delusions and helping you to eliminate them, by destroying your delusions and worldly concern in this way, they are giving you ultimate happiness. Thank you very much. I'm so glad. Thank you for, being members of the opposing political party that challenge all of my own views I get so firmly entrenched in. Thank you, all the people who annoy me and irritate me and drive, really poorly on the road, that give me opportunities to practice patience. We should be so grateful for all of these things in our lives, beings and situations, that give us ultimate happiness, the ultimate happiness of enlightenment, because we never are going to become enlightened without practicing in this way. This is another thing Rinpoche emphasizes in his book, Transforming Problems into Happiness. It's not just that it's a good idea to practice with problems in this way, to have them cut through our self-cherishing, to have them show us where we need to work, but it's an essential part of our practice. Again, I didn't find the section in the book before today's class. Maybe I'll try to do that over the break, where Rinpoche essentially says, it's not just that this would be a nice way to practice, it's an essential way to practice. We have to learn to work with challenging situations. We have to learn to see everything that harms our worldly concern and our worldly view and our self-cherishing mind as actually being the perfect opportunity to practice. We should be so grateful for those situations. And if we look at it, this pandemic's lasted, a little over a year now, may go on for some time. Who knows how long this might be around. But for most of our lives, and many of us have lived quite a number of decades, we've had relatively easy situations in terms of, nothing that's challenged to this degree, where we've had like a whole year and more of our lives that have been impacted in the way that we have. I mean, certainly when people who lived through World War II and things like that, those were longer situations that went on that were very challenging for some people in this world. But nonetheless, for many of us, we've had a pretty cushy existence. Well, we get 1 year like this and we get so bent out of shape. We need to say, this is the opportunity to practice. The time is now to look at what's happening around us and to see that it's actually the perfect opportunity to transform all of these habitual tendencies that we've had into something much more positive. Okay, so it's about 11 o'clock now. Let's do 11:10 then. So I'll give you about 10 minutes to take a stretch break, and then I'll come back. I'll ring the bell to round everyone up in about 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, there is one question in the chat box that went to Mary, and she passed it on to me, that essentially says, please, may I ask, when cherishing others and thinking of them as our mother or father, how do we then not get attached to them? So again, if we look at the minds of attachment versus love and compassion, and with most of our, relationships that we have with our own parents, perhaps our partners, our children, whatever the case might be, we probably have those things very sort of mixed up. We don't really have them kind of clear in terms of when we're generating a more positive state of mind versus when we're generating a negative state of mind, which again is the mind of attachment or the other delusions that we might have with relation to others. And the biggest difference between these two that we can see is that the mind of attachment is always I focused and my desire to get something from those beings to satisfy me. Whereas the mind of love and compassion is other focused. It's looking at them through the lens of their desire to be happy, their desire to not suffer, and being focused on that. I'm sort of not even in the equation, other than as the being who wants them to have happiness, wants them to be free from suffering. And then, of course, becomes, as we strengthen that, more dedicated to helping them to have that. So I think if we're really practicing what this mind of cherishing others is all about, and we're seeing others as being someone very dear to us, seeing them as our mothers, our fathers, someone that we can appreciate the relationship that they had with us, I mean, albeit in another life when we don't have that recollection of that, well, then we become focused on their happiness and their well-being. And it's not about how these beings satisfy us or do things for us any longer, because we're holding them in that dear position because of what they've already done for us. Now it's about what do we do for them? And that's why love and compassion are generated on the basis of cherishing others. Remember, in this technique, I'll just go through it very briefly because I didn't want to go too deeply into the technique. We start off with the idea of equalizing self and others to see that we're all on the same level. Right now, it's me up here, everyone else down there. Well, at least get us equal, to recognize that all other beings are the same as us in wanting to be happy, wanting to not suffer, continuing to be thwarted in obtaining true happiness, continuing to experience suffering. And that's the same for all of us. We're all in the same boat, all in the same predicament. What is it we've been saying for the last year? We're all in this together. Well, it's very true in that, fundamental level. We're all involved in samsara and in this unenlightened existence together. And we're all the same in that regard. Then we go on in the techniques to begin to look at the disadvantages of continuing to put ourselves as number one and everyone else is relegated to us. Instead, we want to see the advantages of cherishing others. And that's a bit of what Rinpoche is going into in this section that I'll continue with in a moment. But then we want to make the decision to exchange, to get rid of, okay, so now we might have them a little bit more equal. Well, let's hold others as most important and relegate ourselves to that lower position. Again, it doesn't mean that your needs aren't going to be met, because we just saw through all the teachings that Rinpoche's given us in this book that our needs are met when we attend to the needs of others. So we have to have that mind on the basis of cherishing them that then generates love and compassion for them. And the technique we use in that particular instruction is Tonglen, where we imagine taking away all the suffering of others onto ourselves, putting it on the self-cherishing mind to destroy it, and then giving away all of our happiness, everything we have that brings us happiness, so it becomes the cause of happiness for others. So we don't want to just leave it at that level of, because we can say, well, I'm cherishing my mother and therefore I'm quite attached to her, or cherishing my child and therefore I'm quite attached to him or her. This isn't what we mean, is that we rather see that we cherish them, hold them as supreme, as most important, and then we really want the best for them. It's not about us at all. It's not about what are they doing for us, how will they meet our needs, and so on. So I hope that gives enough instruction. But if there are further questions on this, please go ahead and put something in the chat box, and I will notice it, and we'll have questions later. Okay, so before we get back into the text, I found from a presentation I'd done this past summer. This is, I think, where I was talking about this just before the break, this passage from Rinpoche's book, Transforming Problems into Happiness. He says, to transform problems into happiness, to do this type of work of seeing those people who are challenging you and whatever to be as an impetus for your practice of the Dharma, it is not sufficient simply to see that problems help your practice of virtue, as if it's kind of optional. Oh, well, they can be helpful. This alone is not enough. You must clearly recognize that your problems are actually necessary conditions for your practice of virtue. And you can derive continual, stable happiness from this. So if you have one of those lives where suffering is pouring down on you like rain, as they say in that one verse from Lama Zopa, another verse from Lama Zopa, well, you should feel like you have perfect conditions then. You have all the necessary conditions for your practice of virtue. Virtue being, again, to turn the mind towards more positive states, to diminish the negative tendencies. Every time we have something, a problem, a difficulty, something coming into our lives, we have to see it again as not just, oh, this could help my practice. No, it's necessary for my practice of virtue. In order for me to actually accomplish the deepest benefit to myself and others, I absolutely have to work with my problems and my difficulties. So this is what Rinpoche is getting into, and this section is really showing us the incredible value of being able to have our self-cherishing become more evident to us, get frustrated, whatever, by showing your delusions and helping you to eliminate them, as Rinpoche says, by destroying your delusions and worldly concern in this way. They're giving you ultimate happiness. Thank you, kind mother sentient beings, for giving me all these challenging situations, because they're the perfect opportunity for me to practice and to actually deepen my own qualities and remove my negative tendencies. All of the numberless sentient beings, Rinpoche says, those who are called others, are just like you in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. Again, I just touched on this with regard to that sense of equalizing self and others. Their wishes are exactly the same as yours, and they are numberless. This is one of the rationales that we can also use to move ourselves in that direction of cherishing others more than ourselves, is because we see that if on one side we have me, myself, and I, one person, on the other hand, we have countless sentient beings, limitless sentient beings. And we can't even imagine how many sentient beings there are. We often do visualizations where you visualize all sentient beings around us. I'm sure our visualizations are way short of the mark, right? Because even just to visualize the number of ants that are in your backyard in the summer in New Mexico, I mean, my gosh, there are a tremendous amount of ants. And then you have to include everything that's not an ant, which is a whole lot of other beings, right? All the birds and all the fish and all the mammals and everything else that exists, and even the smaller, microscopic sentient beings and all the human beings. I mean, my gosh, there are almost 8 billion human beings on the planet now. So we can't possibly even imagine all those, but hold all those beings in one container, all other sentient beings, all others, compared to one. Well, this is numberless, and this is just one. So I have this preoccupation through the mind of self-cherishing with the happiness of this one person, when I could be doing a preoccupation with the happiness of numberless beings. And my life would be so much richer and so much more meaningful, and everyone would benefit from that work. Whereas the work I do by self-cherishing, I don't even really benefit. As I pointed out earlier, it might seem like it's benefiting me in the moment, but it doesn't really benefit. It's wasted work. We've been following this mind since beginningless time, and it's never gotten what it promised, what it seems to promise when we follow it. All right, so this is the idea that Rinpoche goes into. Each one of those beings is as important and precious as you think you are. And these others, each of whom is so important and so precious, are numberless. You, just one person, are completely insignificant. You are nothing compared to the numberless others who are so precious and so important. Now, again, this isn't to make you feel like you have, zero self-esteem, that you shouldn't even care about yourself. No, it's the idea that we're trying to counteract the tendency that we have to cherish ourselves, to put ourselves as most important. So we have to use the logic there to say, these countless other beings, they also individually think that they are precious and important. And to me, they are numberless, so why am I holding myself to be so important? I have to begin to see myself and my own needs as really quite insignificant. And once more, it doesn't mean your needs won't get met. They will get met by your dedication to the welfare of others. But we have to begin to see the faults of this mind of cherishing ourselves and replace it with the tendency to hold others most dear. Just like you, all these beings want happiness and do not want suffering. There's nothing more important in your life than working for those sentient beings, pacifying their suffering and giving them happiness. There is nothing more important than this. That's why Rinpoche, I don't recall where it was at, what teaching, and I should have written it down then so I could always go back and cite it in whatever transcripts. But, he has made the claim on numerous occasions that this is the most important thing we can do with our lives, is to develop bodhicitta, to develop the wish to be a benefit to others. And of course, all the Lam Rim is to get us to that, at least, to be able to enter into the great capable being, to generate the mind of bodhicitta on the basis of having already seen all of our own faults, all of our own problems, to then translate to everyone else is suffering in the same way. Everyone else is trying to obtain happiness in the same way. I have to enlarge my concern. But if we can do that with this life, if you can at least generate some good understanding of bodhicitta, much less a realization of bodhicitta, would be wonderful. It'd be amazing to get out of this life with that, right? But at least to live your life with bodhicitta motivation, cherishing other beings, holding them most dear. Well, again, you're going to be happy in this life. You're going to have happiness beyond this life. You're going to have the happiness of your own liberation eventually. You're going to have the happiness of enlightenment eventually. That's how you create the ultimate happiness for yourself and for others, because you then will be able to help others to also experience that same happiness. So there's nothing more important than this, Rinpoche says. Having received a perfect human rebirth, again, way back at the beginning of the class, this course, we talked about that, met a virtuous teacher to lead us on the path to liberation and enlightenment, and met the Buddha Dharma, especially the Mahayana teachings, the teachings that do teach the entire path to enlightenment. Each of us has the opportunity to free all sentient beings from all obscurations and sufferings and lead them to the fully enlightened state. We do have that opportunity, every one of us right now in this moment. You might, and again, this is maybe a counterforce to what we just saw in the previous slide of thinking we're, or 2 slides ago, thinking we're insignificant. You aren't insignificant when it comes to your ability to help others. There, you're quite significant. If you, could realize the Buddha potential that you have right now and accomplish enlightenment for the benefit of others, that would be incredibly significant. You would join the ranks of the Buddha and become a force to help all sentient beings to achieve that same state. So we're not insignificant in that way, but we're insignificant when it comes to the mind of self-cherishing that keeps following our own nonsense, our own garbage. So this is based on the idea of us all having Buddha nature. Just real quickly, what we mean by Buddha nature is essentially, in a conventional sense, we mean the fact that our minds can develop to that degree. Your mind is clear and pure by nature. Everything that contaminates the mind is only there because we haven't created the counterforces to it. As we talked about last week, we have the more temporal counterforces that we can lessen those, but then we have the ultimate antidote. The ultimate antidote is the wisdom realizing emptiness that we'll get into shortly, that will be the counterforce that will remove the root of all of those, and thereby completely purify our minds of those contaminations, those adventitious stains. And we will then know our true nature, which is our Buddha nature. At a deeper level, Buddha nature also refers to the emptiness of the mind. The mind is not inherently existent. Therefore, the delusions are not inherently existent. Nothing is inherently existent. So we can uproot all of those, and our minds can be transformed on the basis of our emptiness, the emptiness of the mind. So again, I'll get into emptiness in just a moment. Let me finish off this section on cherishing others. But we all have that opportunity. yay, be happy for yourself and all beings. That's why bodhicitta makes complete sense, because you have the potential to achieve this, and every other being has the potential to achieve it. So why not dedicate ourselves to becoming a Buddha so we can help others to do that same work? We have this opportunity to help because we have received all the necessary conditions to develop our mind, to generate the graduated path to enlightenment, and to achieve omniscient mind, which has great compassion for all sentient beings and the capacity to guide them. And when we look at ourselves particularly right now compared to our pets, for example, our pets have Buddha nature, but they don't have the opportunity, the conditions that we currently possess. Because of this human existence and a human intellect and an interest in the Dharma and all the conditions around us and the gurus and the Dharma and everything to support us, we have the opportunity to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. Therefore, and this is a very important point that he's making in these next few slides, we are responsible for freeing all sentient beings from all suffering and its causes, the obscurations, and for leading them to the fully enlightened state. It's not just that, again, it's a sort of a nice thing to have, oh, it's great that we all can achieve Buddhahood. We are responsible for others. We need to see it at that level, to see that this is our responsibility for the incredible kindness that others have shown us, for the reality that they all do want to be happy and don't want to suffer. We have to be able to address that. We now have all the conditions. We are the ones that have set it up through our own karma to be able to have perfect access to the Dharma, to have this perfect human life. Well, now we have responsibility to use that to free all sentient beings from suffering and its causes by becoming a Buddha, so we can lead them to Buddhahood themselves. And then this is a very, again, powerful example, I think. He says, I often use this example. If you saw a blind person walking toward a cliff, say you were, in some place here in the mountains, in Santa Fe, and you saw them, they gotten separated from the people they were with, perhaps, or their seeing eye dog wasn't there, and they were wandering towards a cliff. You would immediately grab the person before they fell over the precipice, right? I mean, you wouldn't even think about it. It wouldn't matter whether, that person asked for help or not. You don't have to say, oh, am I going in the right direction? You'd see them there stumbling towards a cliff and you'd be like, over there, you'd make a beeline for them, right? Without a doubt. Okay, if you have all the necessary conditions, eyes to see, voice to call, hands to grab, then you are capable of helping the blind person. Similarly, by having these, you are responsible for helping the person who is in danger of falling off the cliff, right? I mean, they do have this. I'm not saying that legally you're responsible. We're not going to get into a legal argument about this. I mean, there's good Samaritan laws in a lot of places in the country where people are legally required to do something if they can help somebody. But just ethically, morally, this is really what we would say is, if you were there and you just watched that blind person go off the cliff, well, that's not being responsible at all. We should be taking responsibility for helping that person who's blind from falling off the cliff. If someone who had the capacity to help saw the situation and didn't lend a hand, it would be very cruel and shameful. Somehow it wouldn't fulfill the purpose of having eyes and limbs, which is to use them to help others. I mean, this is really what we have. I mean, if we really look at it, these things are not just to feed our own faces and to, see all the delightful things that we want to see in our lives. They're to help others, to benefit others. And if in the situation where we can actually help others, we don't use them for that purpose, that would really be a shame. If such a thing happened, how pitiful it would be from the side of the blind person about to fall off the cliff, and how terrible from the side of the person who had all the conditions necessary to help, but didn't. How very cruel and harmful it would be if now, while we have all the necessary conditions, as if we have the eyes and the limbs and everything to help that blind person, we have the perfect human rebirth, we've met with the Mahayana Dharma, we have gurus in our lives, we have the teachings around us all the time. Now, given all those conditions, if we don't practice bodhicitta, the essence of Buddha's teachings, especially the Mahayana teachings, if we don't develop this ultimate good heart, if we don't develop the capacity to guide sentient beings, if we don't achieve enlightenment in order to work perfectly for sentient beings, but instead always live with the self-cherishing thought, thinking of nothing but our own happiness. I mean, how cruel and selfish that would be, Rinpoche says. In reality, we are completely responsible for leading all sentient beings to enlightenment. But I think it's a powerful example, and it really does show once more that we have to take it at that level of responsibility. I mean, I've had teachings from some Tibetan teachers who say that we should hold that thought definitely, that there are, without a doubt, some beings that exist right now in our lives whose enlightenment depends upon you. And that's the one benefit that they say when someone attains enlightenment as a Buddhahood. Well, as a Buddha, well, you're joining the ranks of all the other Buddhas, right? And you might think, well, there are so many other Buddhas. I think they can take care of enlightening other beings. Why do they need me to become a Buddha? His Holiness says in the Path to Bliss, he says the most immediate benefit from you becoming enlightened is all those beings you have a direct karmic connection with because of your most recent lifetimes, this lifetime or the next lifetime, or whenever it is that you become enlightened, those more recent lifetimes, you've connected those beings. You have a hook of compassion and concern for them and a karmic connection with them. Even if they're enemies in your life, they will benefit from your becoming enlightened much more quickly than beings that you don't have that karma with, beings on the other side of the planet that we don't know, that we don't see, that we're not that involved with. Buddhas are dedicated to the welfare of all beings, but they have to have the karmic hook. Something has to kind of create that. Because from the side of the Buddhas, they can't enlighten all beings from their own side. It takes the side of sentient beings to be there as well. So those beings who are in your life right now, your dear mother of this life, father of this life, other relatives, friends, partners, children, whoever, pets, all these people, beings that are involved in your life right now, they are the ones who will most directly benefit from your enlightenment when you become a Buddha. Others will benefit as well because you're a force joining the ranks of the Buddhas to enlighten all beings. But we're responsible for those beings. It does help you, I think, to cultivate a deeper sense of bodhicitta when you think there are people who depend upon me and will depend upon me to become a Buddha themselves. Well, then I can't let them down, especially if they've been so incredibly kind to me. So I think it is important that we see this, and what Rinpoche is trying to get across here is the level of responsibility we have. And we can take it as quite specific to those beings in our life right now, but we can also take it as he's presenting it here for all sentient beings, because we do have to eventually get to that place where we want to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, to work perfectly for them. And how selfish and cruel it would be if all we did was follow the self-cherishing thought with this life and not generate a thought that cherishes others, the mind of bodhicitta. So cherishing yourself is an obstacle to the development of the mind, to the generation of realizations of the path. If you cherish yourself, and by cherish yourself, we don't mean just have some self-concern. We mean self-preoccupation, self-centeredness, what we often call self-cherishing, this elevated state of self-importance. Then if you cherish yourself, there's no enlightenment. But if you cherish even one sentient being, there is enlightenment. Cherishing even one sentient being makes possible the achievement of enlightenment. And again, by cherishing, we don't mean, as that question was directed, that I answered at the beginning of the second part of the teaching, we getting attached to them. We mean holding them very dear and wanting them to be happy, wanting them to be free from suffering, not for our sake, for their sake. Whoops. Oh, I thought I skipped a slide. So there is a big difference, Rinpoche says. The conclusion is that even one sentient being is much more precious than you. Without considering the preciousness of sentient beings due to their great number, you can see that even one sentient being is unbelievably precious, because that being will help you to become a Buddha. Every single being is a cause for your enlightenment, your own welfare, without a doubt. So every single being is precious. So what is called I is the object to be abandoned forever. What is called others, even one sentient being as the others, is the object to be cherished forever. This is why living your life for others, dedicating your life to even one sentient being, gives the greatest enjoyment and the most interesting life. What a relief it is to sort of set aside that preoccupation with the I to being preoccupied with the welfare of others. It's like, give it a rest. We've been under the control of this mind since beginningless time. It'd be better just to set it aside and say, I'm going to stop being so preoccupied with this ridiculous self that I'm clinging to and so obsessed with, and be concerned about others, even just one other sentient being. So this is the wonderful quote that I did highlight here that you probably have seen from Rinpoche that's in this book. Real happiness in life starts when you cherish others. Living your life for others, cherishing them with loving kindness and compassion, is the door to happiness, the door to enlightenment. the door to satisfaction. This is really what he's talking about as the most final teaching on how we obtain real happiness, real satisfaction, is to live our lives for others. I've alluded to this earlier, this idea of the happiness of Dharma, and we can talk about the happiness of Dharma at all the various levels of the stages of the path. But the ultimate happiness is the happiness of living one's life for the welfare of other beings. Without a doubt, this is what Rinpoche teaches every single moment of his life. If you've been around him, you know that that is what exudes from his speech, from his being, from all of his actions, is concern for other beings. And he's the happiest person I think we can point to. Maybe not, we don't want to get into a competition with people like the Dalai Lama and Rinpoche, who's happier. The point is that these beings who are working at that level, operating at that level, are zillion times happier than most people we meet. Happier than ourselves, perhaps. So again, we can look at it from that point of view, that the happiness we're really seeking comes from wanting to benefit others, wanting them to get happiness, to be free from suffering. And it's that, again, exchange of self and others that is so crucial to our own happiness as well as the happiness of all beings. As I said, it's a win-win situation. So we should be signing up for it immediately. I really do love this chapter on cherishing others, and I was so happy again for the opportunity to revisit it in these teachings. So let's go on to the, I'm not going to be able to spend as much time on this perhaps as I'd like, but finding no self to cherish. This is the emptiness teachings to show that, again, there is, and these actually preceded the chapter on cherishing others, but I like it afterwards because I really wanted to emphasize in the thread that we were going from the previous classes to really culminate in that idea that our greatest happiness, our greatest satisfaction will come when we cherish others, not just let go of our own worldly concern and what have you, but go all the way up to the culmination, the peak of our path to enlightenment. But the emptiness teachings are very important because we have to see that, again, this preoccupation with ourselves at the deeper level, the self-grasping, is problematic as well, obviously. So Rinpoche says, the I, which is merely imputed, which is labeled on the aggregates, does not exist in the way it is seen by our ignorance. Ignorance holds the I not as merely labeled, but as existing from its own side. Let's talk about this just a little bit because, again, we've been talking about this idea from the conventional side of the I that's being cherished, that is being held as most dear, and we want to kind of replace that with others. But we do have to get at this deeper level of ignorance that is also mistakenly holding the I to be real. And Rinpoche uses this word real to refer to this false conception. It doesn't mean that there is no reality. When he says that there is no real I or no real this or real that, he doesn't mean there is nothing at all, that it's all pointless, that nothing exists. And this is an important thing to remember as we go through those teachings. Rather, to say that the sense of reality that every one of us has is that object that we need to negate. To think that there is something that is real from its own side. We think there's a real I here, that there is something that is the referent of that is true, that is in existence with the way that it appears. This is one of the biggest mistakes, and I talked about this in the Perfection of Wisdom when we talked about the 6 perfections in the previous course, is that Rinpoche talks about how there are essentially 3 steps that happen in terms of our ignorance giving rise within our minds and, of course, causing problems. The first thing is a base appears to you, and that base gets labeled. So whenever we came in contact with our own self-perception of this base of this mind and body, that, again, the body came from your parents, from the 2 cells of your parents that united in your mother's womb, that developed into the body that you have a continuum of at this moment. Your mind was from prior lives, and prior lives, it's beginningless. You never find a beginning to it. But that conscious awareness that is also a part of the basis for you was together with this collection of material stuff. Those 2 things, mind and body, often called the aggregates, which is a way of pinpointing more aspects of the mind as well as the form, the physical aspect of our basis. That's the basis for an I. At some point in our awareness, we began to associate those as I, to think that there is a real I on the basis of this. But it was really just labeled. The first step that we engage in of these 3 is simply to put a label on that, to think of this as I. Just like we do that with regard to everything in our world. We think of something as an iPhone, or we think of something as a cup, or something as a person, or whatever it is that we're referring to. The basis for those appear, and we give the label to it. And this is how we organize our world. We need to have labels for things. Otherwise, I couldn't talk to you, teach the Dharma, and we couldn't relate to each other, have any sorts of other experiences of communicating. We need to have ideas, conceptualizations of things, as well as language that helps us to express those conceptualizations. All of this is part of having just a conventional world. At the very first step, there's nothing wrong. We're simply labeling a particular basis that appears to us. We decide we're going to call it that. We're going to call this collection of stuff I, or Don, or wherever I'm referring to all of this, okay? The second step is that all of that sense of a Don or an I that I've labeled on this basis now appears back to me as if it's inherently here, as if it's existing from its own side, as if it has that reality that again is fictitious. That's due to these very subtle imprints of our ignorance that give rise to that false appearance. So when we have something physical, like my little wrist mala that I fidget with sometimes when I'm teaching. So if I have my little wrist mala here, again, when I put this before you, you have the basis, which is the 21 beads and the guru bead and so on, and the little string that goes through them all and what have you. You have the basis for that appearing and you go, oh, wrist mala. Well, wrist mala is the first step of giving a label to this collection of stuff. But then the collection of stuff seems to have wrist mala covering it, and it's projected back towards us in a sense. It's not happening out here. It's within our own minds that we have this idea of it being real from its own side that is appearing to us. And then the third step is we agree to that. We think, oh, there's a real wrist mala in Don's hand. There's no real wrist mala in Don's hand. There's the basis for wrist mala, but wrist mala is a concept we give to this collection of stuff. There's no real wrist mala. There's a correct basis for it. If I held up this, which is what I ring the little bell here with, you would say, oh, that's not a wrist mala. This is a bell ringer. We give another label to that. And that's based on, again, our understanding of that, our experience of that, our definition of that. It's all mentally conceived. This is how everything exists, is through that first step of mere labeling. But then it appears to exist from its own side. It appears to have bell ringer from its own side, and we assent to that. We agree to that. That's how our ignorance is operative in our lives. And we agree to it naturally. We don't even think about it. This whole process of labeling, it appearing back as real, and us agreeing to it happens instantly. And this is how we get into trouble. And this is what Rinpoche is going to talk about a bit here. Even though the I is merely labeled in this way, it appears to exist from its own side. Ignorance, as he says here, holds the I not as merely labeled, but as existing from its own side, existing inherently. This truly existent aspect held by ignorance does not exist. There is no inherently existent or truly existent or existing from its own side I, or bell ringer, or wrist mala, or whatever the case might be. We have to be aware that what appears to exist from its own side is empty of existing from its own side. We have to begin to cut through this hallucination, as Rinpoche often calls it, things appearing to exist from their own side that don't have an atom of that at all. They appear that way, and we've been agreeing to it since beginningless time. We have to begin to see that they are empty of existing in that way. All things that exist, starting with the I, are nothing other than what is merely imputed. Again, there is no real I. We have this strong sense of it, the I being as real as it gets, but it is not real in that way at all. It's merely imputed, merely designated. It's a thought of I in relation to this mind-body complex. There is no I other than what is merely imputed. And he goes on to say, similarly, action, object, friend, enemy, stranger. Well, I put stranger in there twice. Possessions, sense objects, all these are nothing other than what is merely imputed by the mind. All of these are completely empty. Almost, I underline this, it wasn't Rinpoche's underline, almost as if they don't exist. Now, I share that one often with people because I think it is important that we get to that stage of kind of understanding it's almost as if they don't exist. That makes it like, just like a hair thin, this is like this little thin boundary between what does exist and what doesn't exist. It's almost as if the I doesn't exist. Rinpoche uses this frequently because we have to get to that place of understanding that our sense of reality that we project onto everything is pretty massive. It goes down to that level, and we have to get to this thin layer of how the I actually exists, which once more is just merely imputed, merely designated. We have to be able to do that. Why? Because otherwise we're going to still keep clinging to some sense of a real I if we don't go that distance. But you don't want to go to where you remove the thin little hair then, and then there's nothing. That's another problem that we have, is that if we go too far and we think that we've negated the real I, but we've actually negated even the merely imputed I. There's no I at all. You don't exist. Well, you do exist, but the way you exist is not the way you think you exist. It's through mere designation, mere imputation, mere labeling. And this is the, again, subtlest view of emptiness that the Buddha taught, the thing that we have to realize if we are ever to be free of all of our problems and experience true peace and happiness for ourselves and help others to do the same. So then he goes back once more. Here come the 8 worldly dharmas again, right? Happiness, unhappiness, praise, criticism, pleasant sounds, unpleasant sounds, good reputation, bad reputation, getting things, not getting things. The appearance of all these as real, existing from their own side, has nothing to do with reality. Not even an atom of them exists in this way. In reality, all these are completely empty. Excuse me. So this is another way we can work with the 8 worldly dharmas. We've been working with them throughout this whole course, right? Understanding that initially we can just see them in a very conventional way as, oh, these are problematic behaviors that we need to begin to address and stop having so much desire for, and da-da-da-da. But we can also see them as leading to an identification of self-cherishing that we saw just earlier today, but also as an identification of emptiness, an ability for us to apply the understanding that these things don't exist in the way that they appear. That praise, and this is actually the antidote that I went over in the meditation I led on praise and criticism some weeks ago. The idea was that we could see them as empty sounds. They're sounds that we are giving meaning to. We are imputing the meaning of those sounds of praise. There's nothing from their own side that makes them praise. In fact, if you take those words, somebody saying, oh, you're a really great person, you're a really great person. Teach a parrot to say that to you 50,000 times a day. You know, oh, you're a really great person. Oh, you're a really great person. Oh, you're a really great person. They stop being praise at some point, right? Maybe right from the beginning, they stop being praise. Who makes them praise? You do. It is your own mind that makes them praise. All of these 8 worldly dharmas, we can begin to see their empty nature as well. They don't exist in the way that they appear. They appear to be real, and that's part of our problem. That's why we grasp at them. That's why we get attached to them, is because we think that they are real in the way they appear, but they don't exist that way at all. So, Rinpoche says there's no reason at all to generate attachment, anger, and ignorance. It is complete nonsense, unnecessary, and meaningless, and moreover, it creates problems. Without reason, your mind has created these problems. Without any good reason at all, it's once more, I mean, some people compare it, and of course in the time of the Buddha they didn't have films, movies, TV, whatever, but it would be like if you watched a film and you took everything so completely serious, and not a documentary or something that's based on like real life, but say it's a fictional film, and you were like, so concerned, and you were, emotionally caught up in all of it as if it was real life, but it was just, light on a screen. That's all it is. Actors that are very skillfully, and the writers and everybody else behind it that put this whole thing together. It's all just a show, but you're like taking it all so seriously. Well, we're doing this with our world. We're taking it all way too seriously on the basis of mistaken ignorance that is grasping at things appearing in the way that is contrary to how they actually exist. Just like the person watching the film thinking it's absolutely real, and I have to be so emotionally invested in it because it appears to be real. Those appear to be real people, and they're on the screen in front of me, but they're just, it's light, it's little pixels and things on digital screens and what have you. That's really all that's going on. It's our minds that are creating it, and we create the problems, and we create the solutions to the problems. Look at the nature of everything in this way. The label is imputed to the base, and in turn, that base is also labeled on another base, right? You know, the mala that I was holding up, the labeled, merely labeled mala, that base, again, has its own individual parts that have a base, and those parts have a base, and so on. You know, by nature, everything is merely imputed. In this way, everything is like an illusion. Again, I underline this because Rinpoche does emphasize it in this chapter. It's like an illusion. Don't think that life is an illusion. Life is like an illusion because it appears in one way, but it doesn't exist that way. It exists as merely imputed. To conclude this slide, nothing exists from its own side, but everything appears as if it does. There is no way for the label to arise without thinking first of the reasons. After seeing a particular form, you then impute a particular label. When we label anything, we think of the characteristics of that object or person, and then we apply the label, right? So the base always comes first. A base appears to us, and then we label it. Remember, that was the first step. We think of or see the base first, then we apply a label to it. This evolution proves that the base is not the label. The label comes later. If the base were the label, it would be crazy to label it again, right? Because it already has the label. There would be no reason to label it. You would just be duplicating. So again, somebody who hasn't learned the label for this, if I just held this up in front of them, they would already see that this is saying wrist mala from its own side. Every little bead would be screaming it. You know, all of the parts of it would be covered with wrist mala. You wouldn't need to learn to call this wrist mala, which is kind of a strange thing in English. We don't even, I mean, it's using a Sanskrit word, I imagine, mala. I don't even know where the word mala comes from now that I think about it. But, you know, we're using these words to refer to this. If it had wrist mala from its own side, just seeing this would be good enough to get wrist mala. You wouldn't need to have any other involvement with the mind. It would already have it from its own side. But there's a basis. This is the base, and the label is wrist mala. They are two different things. They aren't the same thing. That's why I, maybe again, I've said this so many times that I don't get the import of it myself sometimes, and perhaps you don't either. But what I'm holding in my hand is not a wrist mala. It is the basis for wrist mala. Wrist mala is the thought I give, the label I give to this. Conventionally, we can say, yeah, what's Don holding in his hand? Oh, a wrist mala. But is it a real wrist mala? Is there a real wrist mala here? No, there's just the basis for wrist mala, and I am imputing that label to that basis. They are actually two different phenomena. Wrist mala and the basis for wrist mala that I'm holding in my hand. Okay, so we're going to have just a little bit more to wrap up on this emptiness thing, and then I can get to Rinpoche's final advice from this book. To think about the base and the label as different is another brief way to meditate on emptiness. This is a clear and essential way to get some feeling for emptiness. Practice awareness of this. So I would encourage you, there's a lot from today's class that you can practice. The exchanging self and other, remembering death and impermanence, practicing an awareness of emptiness in this way, but that's a really good one to work with. Apply the reasoning that each phenomenon analyzed is empty because it is merely imputed. This will automatically make you feel that it is empty. Again, that's why this reasoning of dependent arising, coming to see the subtlest way that things exist in dependence upon mere imputation, mere designation. Concentrate on the emptiness, Rinpoche says. The more deeply you understand the meaning of merely imputed, of subtle dependent arising, the more deeply you understand emptiness. That's why it's said to be the king of reasonings. It's the one that really helps you to find that middle way, that perfect way that you can understand how things don't exist, but also the subtle way that they do exist. When you do not practice awareness of this in day-to-day life, the mind is overwhelmed by hallucinations, by wrong conceptions, like a city flooded by water. The mind is possessed by wrong thoughts, wrong appearance, wrong view. Because in reality, the eye is completely empty. There's nothing to cherish. Look at the eye as empty, then check whether there is any object to cherish. If there's no real eye in the way that it appears, there is nothing to cherish. There's nothing to grasp at. There's nothing to be overly concerned about. We can acknowledge the way that the eye actually exists as extremely subtle and no basis whatsoever for any cherishing or any other delusions. Since the I that exists is merely imputed, nothing to cherish, nothing to cling to. If you check, self-cherishing is completely silly and only creates problems. Although you don't want problems, guess what? You create problems through the force of that ignorance that is grasping at the self, cherishing the self, and so on. Okay, so now we get into the final little bits. I'll try to give some room for some questions. Having no choice but to practice Dharma. I think I'm just going to read this through and then I'll make some comments at the end. His Holiness the Dalai Lama often advises that the best way to live one's life is in an isolated, solitary place, renouncing this life in the 8 worldly dharmas and one-pointedly concentrating the mind on the graduated path to enlightenment. Developing realizations of the path to enlightenment is the best. But not everybody can do this, right? Most of us may find that challenging in this life. For those who cannot live such a life, but who have a Dharma education, the second best choice is to teach Dharma to others. Even though such people cannot practice complete renunciation, they practice as much as they can and teach others. Teaching others the Dharma is a very positive thing to do with our lives. For those who don't have the Dharma education needed to teach others or aren't inclined in that way, the third option is to practice as much as possible and to serve others in society. To recognize that many of us simply just have to be, resigning, maybe not resigning ourselves to the fact, but embracing that this is what we're here to do. Maybe we don't have that proclivity in this life to go off to retreat and do all sorts of, dedicated practice, but practice as much as possible and serve others in society. There is no choice, Rinpoche says. Since you don't like problems, there is no choice. You have to practice Dharma. This is the conclusion. Dharma is the only means to stop problems and to bring peace in the mind. There is nothing else. If we really have had our share of problems since beginningless time, we have to come to that conclusion that it is only the Dharma that is going to stop them. It's the only thing that will bring peace. If you don't like suffering, there is no way to escape from Dharma practice. Practicing Dharma means renouncing the cause of problems, which are in your mind, and creating the causes of happiness, which are also in your mind. How many times have we heard that in this course? But have we gotten it? Have we really, signed up for that? Are we still preoccupied with all the external stuff? Or are we actually looking to increase all of the things Rinpoche says that are the thoughts presented in this book that induce happiness, that eliminate our suffering and all of our problems? So whether you are Buddhist or non-Buddhist, there's no other way to solve life's problems and to make it impossible for them to occur again. No matter how many problems you experience, you have to practice Dharma. Even though you may not have time to do long retreats or study extensively, you have to do what you can to practice Dharma because you don't want problems and unhappiness. Even though you may have many problems with disease or with your relationships in this life, you cannot use this as an excuse to give up practicing Dharma. You have to do what you can. You have to practice Dharma. I think the Dharma practice is explained in Opening the Door of Dharma, which again was the root text that he was using for most of this book, are very important. They are the main refuge in life and are extremely effective for the mind. They help to stop every type of problem. Reading, thinking about, and especially practicing Opening the Door of Dharma is the solution to problems. Even when we find time to do some Dharma activity, it is the thought of the 8 worldly Dharmas that does not allow our practice to become pure Dharma. Because it causes laziness, this thought makes us unable to practice Dharma or delays our practice. So we have to see, once more, he's highlighting that that's the first step often, is to see what is keeping you from your initial engagement of Dharma is the way 8 worldly Dharmas, 8 worldly concerns. It weakens our mind so that we are unable to make a determination to practice. The whole thing is a question of determination. I should have highlighted that sentence. Without determination, development doesn't come. I love this ending to it because it really is coming down to the nuts and bolts. The whole thing comes down to a question of determination. How determined are we? How determined are we to reverse the patterns that we've been involved in and to move in the opposite direction? This inability to make the determination becomes the source of problems and obstacles. Your own mind creates the difficulty. Your own mind makes it difficult to practice and to generate the realizations of the path. Because that inability to make the determination comes from your own mind. Nobody's inflicting that on you from outside. It's your own mind that is not determining to practice the Dharma. If the determination to practice is made, though, there are no difficulties. If the determination is not made, there are. Difficulty in practicing Dharma comes from your own mind, from your inability to make the necessary determination. And what makes you unable to make that determination is the thought of the eight worldly dharmas. That's, again, the bottom line, is that we do have to see that this is what is the initial obstacle. The thing we have to address is our preoccupation with this life, our attachment to the happiness of this life. We have to begin to let that go and to make the determination to move in the opposite direction. When you separate yourself from the evil thought of the eight worldly dharmas, no difficulties in your practice. When you live inseparably with this evil thought, when you are a friend of the eight worldly dharmas, lots of difficulties. If you're able to make the determination not follow desire and to follow Dharma and to practice Dharma right now, there's peace. If you cannot, there is no peace. On this very seat, in this very minute that you make the determination, immediately there is peace. When you do not make this determination, no peace. Maybe I put in too many of these slides. I really wanted to hammer it home in the way Rinpoche does. If you make the determination, peace is something that you can experience immediately, right in this second. There is no other choice, no other solution. Okay, and then Rinpoche on the screen there. Wonderful photo that is just recent. This was in November of 2020 from Kopan Monastery, where Rinpoche has been throughout most of the pandemic. He's not there right now, but anyway. And I have to say my thanks to Rinpoche for this book, which, as I mentioned at the very beginning of all this, I read in my first FPMT class back with Venerable Rabina in January of 1996 when I came to Seychenling in San Francisco. And it was a joy to revisit this text and to really see what riches are in there. And I hope that my sharing some of those with you, not completely as a book report, but nonetheless, I really wanted Rinpoche's teachings to be the core of this class. And hopefully the explanations I've given, the additional information has helped you to feel some connection to these teachings, and of course to Rinpoche and his immeasurable kindness giving us these teachings. So were there any questions or comments on anything that I've talked about that people want to share? I just was checking the chat box. Let me see if anyone has anything. No? Okay. Well, we are at noon, so maybe we just go ahead and do our dedications then. But really, again, keep in mind, I've saved all of these presentation slides and files, and they're all still up out at the Dropbox for this. Know that some of the older ones have gone into an obsolete folder. You can click on that obsolete folder, and the older ones will be there. But just know that you can find all of them there, and you might download them all just to make sure that you have them if you do want to refer to them. But certainly, if you can read Rinpoche's book, if you've been reading it through this course, that's great. If you want to reread it after this and maybe see what additional insights you gain from Rinpoche, I would really encourage that. But I think we have amazing blessings in having such an incredible guru. Rinpoche, as our spiritual director, has unbelievable wisdom and insight. He was teaching on this text in 1973, so here we are almost 40 years later, and we still can find 50 years, almost 50 years later, we can still find incredible value in these teachings because of Rinpoche's practice and his amazing heart. So let's go ahead and dedicate all of this, and I guess we are first going to have a little Thanksgiving mandala offering prayer since we're at the end of this class, as well as my time here, because we got new events coming up in Sunday, Geshe-la returning in May, which is wonderful. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, I think. Mary, are you there?
Thank you so much, Gen Don, and we really want to thank you for all of your teachings this year. And this book is, as you mentioned, is incredible. It's part of our Heart series, so people are more familiar with the teachings of Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe. But Gen Don, thank you so much. So we would like to just all thank you, and we will recite a Thanksgiving mandala as our way of saying thank you. First in Tibetan and the second one in English. And thank you so much, Gen Don. Sajipu ki jushing metok tramri rabling shi ni degen padi Sangye Jingdu Mi Te Huai Drokunam Dag Jing La Cho Par Shog. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losang always remain, dispel the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. Idam Guru Ratnam Mandala Kam Niryateyami. And then we will continue with our normal dedication verses. Gen Don, would you like to lead this?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Thank you so much for the mandala offering and for the opportunity to teach on this text. So let's do the dedication prayers first by bringing to mind all those beings that we're holding in our hearts. Every one of us knows people, animals, whoever, who are experiencing problems, difficulties, illness, who are dying or who have died. Bring them to mind quite specifically. Remember what I said earlier in class, that these are the beings who we might have that initial impulse. We're becoming enlightened for them, for those beings who are quite dear to us in this life, who we do have a karmic connection with. But moreover, we want to also think of all beings, that we want to dedicate this merit for the welfare of every single sentient being, for our own enlightenment, so we can help them all to actualize perfect happiness and complete freedom from suffering. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. So as we recite this last verse, try to generate that very long-term, far-reaching attitude that is bodhicitta, the wish to do whatever it takes, however long it takes, to achieve enlightenment, to help all sentient beings. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And we do the prayers for our precious teachers. As we recite each of these, think that we're creating the causes for their good health and long lives, but also for the good health and long lives of all spiritual guides in all spiritual traditions, and also for the fulfillment of the holy wishes of all these amazing beings, and that everything that they desire will come to pass. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally for Tenzin Osalhita, Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay. Again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to teach this text, as well as the course I did on transcending our limitations, working with the perfections earlier. Really enjoyed these Sunday classes with all of you. And I look forward to being back in your physical presence in the new space at some point, whenever that happens later this year or beginning of next year. So anyway, everyone take care, be well. Maybe I'll see some of you again on Wednesday night, and certainly the remaining 2 meditations that I'll be leading. And then you'll see me here and there. Again, everything's still kind of working out in terms of my schedule, but know that I'll continue to be present in TNL for as long as possible. So, all right, everyone, be well. Thank you.